They did not capture the Lakota healer for her beauty, or for ransom, or for revenge. They captured her for her hands, because their chief was dying, and her hands were said to be the finest healer's hands in all that borderland country. Her name was Maka. She was Lakota, a healer of the displaced northern bands, and her skill had become a kind of legend, even across the lines that separated peoples. The woman who could draw a fever down when the fever should have won, who knew the plants and the bones and the long, slow arts of bringing a body back. A reputation like that travels, and it had traveled south, to the Apache, whose old chief lay dying of a wound gone bad that none of their own healers could save. So a party of Apache warriors crossed into the borderland and took Maka from her people, not gently, and carried her south to their dying chief, and set her down in front of the young war leader, who now led the band, a hard, grieving man named Dahana, whose father lay rotting from the inside, in the great lodge behind him. "They say you can save what cannot be saved," Dahana said to Maka, through a captive who translated. "My father is dying. Our healers have given up. Save him, Lakota, and you will be treated well. Fail, or refuse, and you will learn what the Apache do to those who let their chief die. You were not brought here to be asked. You were brought here to work. Now work." Maka looked at the hard, grieving man, and at the dying old chief through the lodge door, and she did a thing that surprised everyone. She did not cower, and she did not refuse. She walked past Dahana into the lodge, to the dying man, because Maka was a healer to the bone, and a healer does not see an enemy chief on a death mat. A healer sees a body that might be saved, and she could no more walk away from that than she could stop her own heart. Hold on to that. A woman taken for her hands, valued like a tool, set to work under threat. Because the man who captured her as a tool is going to learn, slowly, that he has brought into his camp a person greater than the skill he stole her for, and that the hardest thing he will ever do is the thing the title gives away. He will never be able to let her leave. How a captured tool became a chosen wife is the whole of this story. It begins with a dying chief and a healer taken for her hands. To understand everything that came after, you have to understand the 3 days and 3 nights Maka spent fighting for the life of an old man, who was her enemy's father, because those 3 days changed how an entire camp saw her. The old chief was far gone. The wound in his leg had turned, and the poison was up in his blood, and the Apache healers had been right to give up, because by every ordinary measure, the old man should have died. But Maka was not ordinary, and she did not give up. She opened the wound and cleaned the rot the hard old way. She drew the poison with heat and poultice through a day and a night. She brewed the medicines she knew, finding the closest southern cousins of her northern plants, and she poured her whole skill and her whole stubborn will into a body that wanted to quit. The young war leader Dahana sat by his father through all of it, watching the Lakota captive he had threatened fight for the old man's life with everything she had. And Dahana, who had brought Maka in as a tool, who had spoken to her as a tool, began to see something that did not fit his picture of her. She was not working out of fear of his threat. He could see it. A frightened captive works carefully, with one eye on the door. Maka worked like a person possessed, like the old man's life mattered to her for its own sake, like she would have fought just as hard for a stranger, or a friend, or an enemy, because to her, they were all simply life, and life was the thing she served. On the 3rd night, the fever broke, the old chief's blood cleared, and the poison drained, and the old man, who should have been dead, opened his eyes and asked for water. Maka had done the thing that could not be done. She did not crow about it. She did not turn to Dahana for praise. She simply slumped back against the lodge wall, exhausted past speaking, and let the relief move through her, the way it moves through every true healer who has just won a fight they expected to lose, quiet and shaking and grateful. A camp watched her in that moment, and saw, Not a captive who had bought her safety, but a healer, emptied out by 3 days of fighting for a stranger's life. You cannot fear or despise a person you have watched do that. And the whole camp, which had brought her in as a captured tool, looked at the Lakota woman who had pulled their chief back from the dead, and the looking was different now. You do not look at a tool the way you look at a person who has just saved your chief's life. The change began that night, in how an entire band saw her, and Dahana felt it begin in himself most of all. Here is what made Maka more than her hands, and what made Dahana unable to think of her as a tool for long. She would not be made small. After she saved the old chief, Maka could have played the grateful, careful captive, the survivor who keeps her head down and waits for mercy. She did not. She had saved their chief, and she knew the worth of what she had done, and she carried herself accordingly, with a straight back and a level eye, even surrounded by the people who had stolen her. "I have saved your chief," Maka said to Dahana, plainly, once the old man was out of danger. "I did what your own healers could not. So let us speak as two people who both know what that is worth. I am not your tool, and I am not your servant, and the threats you made me the first day, I have already forgotten, because a healer does not work for threats. She works because she cannot do otherwise. Now, I have kept my side of a bargain I was never asked about. When your chief is strong, you will send me home to my people. That is the price of what I did. Say it now, in front of your camp, so there is no lie told later. It was a bold thing for a captive to demand." The camp held its breath to see how the hard young war leader would answer being spoken to that way by a stolen woman. And Dahana, who was hard but not a fool, found that he respected her too much to lie to her. "When my father is strong," Dahana said, slowly, the words costing him more than the camp understood, "I will send you home. You have my word, in front of my people. You saved what could not be saved, and you ask only to go home, and that is a fair price, and I will pay it." He paused. "But hear me too, Maka. You speak as though you were only a tool I used. You were. I will not pretend otherwise, and I am not proud of it. But a man can be wrong about what he has done. I brought a tool into this camp. I find I have a person. That is my error to carry, not yours. I will send you home. I only ask that while you are here, you let me undo, a little, the way I began." So Dahana set about undoing the way he had begun, and it is in the small undoings that the bargain started to turn, the way it always turns in these stories, not in one grand gesture, but in 100 small ones. He moved Maka from the edge of the camp where captives were kept, to a lodge of her own, with honor. He saw that she had everything a guest, not a prisoner, would have. He stopped the few young men who muttered about the Lakota woman, plainly and publicly, so that the whole camp understood she was under his protection. And he began, awkwardly, to spend time near her, not as a captor checking on a tool, but as a man who had discovered a person he wanted to know. They talked, over the days of the old chief's recovery, in the patched-together speech of trade words and gestures. Dahana learned that Maka had become a healer because her own grandmother had been one, and that she had lost people she could not save, as every healer does, and that those losses were the reason she fought so hard for the ones she could, including a dying enemy chief. Maka learned that Dahana was newly the leader of a band that had been ground small by the hard years, that he carried his father's dying and his people's survival on shoulders that were younger than they looked, and that under the hardness was a man drowning quietly in responsibility he had not asked for. "You captured me to save your father," Maka said one evening. "But your father is not the only thing in this camp that is sick, Dahana. You are carrying your whole people on your back, and you are doing it alone, and you have not let yourself grieve the father who is dying, even as he recovers, because you cannot afford to. I am a healer. I see it. You are wounded too. You just cannot lie down on a mat with it." It was the first time anyone had seen Dahana the man instead of Dahana the war leader, and it undid something in him, to be seen like that by the woman he had wronged and then come to admire. A man can guard himself against an enemy. He cannot guard himself against being truly seen by someone who means him well. That night, Dahana sat alone outside his father's lodge and let himself feel, for the first time since the old man took ill, the weight he had been refusing to set down. The fear of losing his father, the terror of leading a band he was not sure he was ready to lead, the loneliness of carrying all of it, with no one to carry the other side. And he understood that the Lakota captive had named every piece of it in one quiet sentence, gently, the way you would name a wound to a person too proud to admit they were bleeding. No one had done that for Dahana since his mother died. He had brought Maka into his camp to heal his father's body. He had not expected her to put her hand on the wound in him. The turn came on the day the old chief, fully recovered now, called Maka before him to thank her, and said a thing that named what was happening before either Dahana or Maka had dared to. "You saved my life, Lakota woman," the old chief said. "I was dead, and your hands brought me back. My people owe you a debt that horses cannot pay." The old man's sharp eyes moved to his son, then back to Maka, and there was a small, knowing smile in them, the smile of an old man who has watched many things and is not fooled by any of them. "And I am old enough to see what is happening in my own camp, even when the two people it is happening to cannot. My son brought you here as a tool. He looks at you now the way I once looked at his mother. And you, healer, look at my son the way you would not look at a man you only wish to leave. I will say no more. An old man saved from death has earned the right to say one true thing, and then be quiet. I have said mine." It landed in the middle of the camp like a stone in still water, because the old chief had said out loud the thing that Dahana had been refusing to look at, and that Maka had been refusing to feel, which was that the captive and the captor had, across the weeks of the old man's healing, fallen into something neither of them had any right to. That night, Maka could not sleep, and neither could Dahana, and the whole problem of it lay between them like the cold desert. She was Lakota. He was Apache. He had captured her. She had demanded, and been promised, to be sent home. Everything about it was wrong, and the old chief had just told them both, plainly, that it was happening anyway. The reckoning came, as it must, when the old chief was strong, and the day arrived that Dahana had promised, the day Maka was to be sent home. Dahana kept his word. He could not do otherwise, having given it in front of his people, and being a man who, whatever his first error, did not break his word. He had horses prepared, and food, and an escort of his most trusted warriors to see Maka safe across the borderland to her own Lakota people. The bargain she had demanded that first day was honored to the letter. The captive was free to go home, and Dahana found, standing in front of the prepared horses, that keeping his word was the hardest thing he had ever done in his life, because he did not want to let her go. And the title of this story is the truest line in it. He could not bear to let her leave. But he was not a man like the cruel ones in these stories, who decide that if they cannot have a thing, they will seize it. Dahana had learned, across the weeks, that Maka was a person, and not a tool, and you do not cage a person you have come to love. So Dahana did the hardest, truest thing. He let her go anyway. "The horses are yours," Dahana said to Maka. "The escort will see you safe to your people. I gave you my word, and here it is, kept. You saved my father. You asked only to go home. You have more than earned it." He stopped, and for once the hard war leader's voice was not steady. "I will not insult what is between us by pretending it is not there. The old man saw it and named it, and he was right. But a thing born from a capture cannot be trusted while the capture still holds you. So go home, Maka. Be free, all the way free, among your own people, with no Apache anywhere near you. And if, when you are free, with every door open and no threat anywhere, you ever find that you wish to come back, then come back, and I will know it is real, because it will be the one thing in this whole sorry beginning that you chose. But I will not ask it of you here, where my asking still has the weight of a captor behind it. Go. The choosing has to be yours, somewhere I cannot reach. Maka rode north with the escort, home to her own Lakota people, free, and the going home was not the simple joy she had expected. Her people received her with the joy you would expect, a stolen daughter returned alive. They had mourned her and feared the worst, and here she was, whole and well, and the camp made a celebration of it. Maka was home. She was free. The capture was over. Everything she had demanded on that first hard day, standing in front of Dahana, had come true. And Maka found, to her own confusion and quiet grief, that she was not happy. She told herself it was only the strangeness of returning, that it would pass. It did not pass. She went back to her healing, to the work she loved, among the people she loved, in the country she belonged to. And every day, in the middle of it, her mind went south, to a hard, grieving war leader, carrying his whole people on his back, to an old chief with knowing eyes, to a camp where she had been taken as a tool, and had somehow, against every rule, been seen as a person, and then set free out of love. She had been given exactly what she asked for, and she had discovered, in the having of it, that she had started asking for the wrong thing somewhere along the way, without noticing. Her grandmother, the old healer who had taught her, had said a thing once that Maka had never fully understood until now. She had said that the hardest patient a healer ever treats is her own heart, because the heart does not want the medicine of good sense. It wants what it wants, and it will sicken quietly, rather than be cured of its wanting. Maka, home among her people, healing strangers' fevers while her own heart sickened for a southern camp, finally understood what her grandmother had meant. She could mend any body in the borderland. She could not talk her own heart out of the man who had freed her. Maka was free now, truly free, with every door open and no threat anywhere, exactly as Dahana had said, which meant that the choice he had refused to take from her was now, fully, hers to make. He had given her the one thing that made the choosing real: distance, freedom, and time. And in the having of all three, Maka found that her heart kept making the same choice over and over. No matter how many times she told it to be sensible, Maka went back. That is the heart of it, the thing the whole story was built to earn. She left her own free camp, with every reason to stay, and she rode south, alone this time, by her own choice, to the Apache band that had once captured her. She came into Dahana's camp, not as a captive dragged in by warriors, but as a woman who had ridden 2 hard days of her own will to reach it, and the difference was the whole point. When the camp saw her coming, alone, unforced, freely returned, they understood what it meant, and word ran ahead of her to Dahana, who came out of his lodge not quite believing it until he saw her face. "You let me go," Maka said, stopping her horse in front of him, in front of the whole watching camp. "All the way. Every door open, no threat anywhere. My own people around me, my own country under me. You gave me the one thing that would make any choice of mine real, which was the freedom to never see you again. And I have spent these weeks discovering that with every door open, and every reason to stay home, my heart keeps choosing the one place it has no sensible reason to choose. Here, you. So I have come back, Dahana, not as the healer you captured, as a free woman who rode 2 days alone to stand in front of you and choose the thing she could not stop choosing. You said if I came back, you would know it was real. Well, here I am. Know it." Dahana crossed to her, and for the first time since the day his warriors had set her down in front of him, he reached out not as a captor or a chief, but as a man, and took her hand. "I brought you here as a tool," Dahana said. "I will be ashamed of that beginning all my life." But you are standing in front of me now because I learned to undo it, and because you chose to ride back through an open door, and there is no shame in this part, only the best thing that ever happened to me. I could not let you leave, Maka. The title of every story they will tell about us is true. From the day you saved my father, I could not bear the thought of this camp without you in it, but I had to let you leave anyway, so that you could choose to return. And you did. Stay, not as a captive, as the woman who rode back. Be my wife, Maka, by your own free choice, the choice I refused to steal from you. Not everyone in the Apache camp was glad to see the Lakota healer return as the war leader's chosen wife, because a camp's doubts do not all dissolve at once. There were warriors who remembered her as a captive and could not easily reframe her as their leader's wife, and there were those who distrusted any joining across the lines of peoples, and there was one in particular, a warrior named Tudawi, who had wanted Dahana's regard for himself and saw in the Lakota woman a rival for his leader's trust. Tudawi talked, the way such men talk, that a war leader who married his enemy's blood and let a captive dictate terms was a weak leader, that the band would suffer for it. But Dahana had two defenders he had not expected, and they silenced the doubt between them. The first was the old chief, his father, the man Maka had saved. The old man rose in front of the band, still walking on a leg that should have rotted off him, and he said, "This woman's hands are the only reason I stand here to speak at all. Any man who calls her unworthy of my son calls me a dead man who should have stayed dead. Is that you, Tudawi? Do you wish I had died? Because that is what you are saying when you say, she should never have come." And the second defender was Maka herself, who did not need anyone to fight her battles, but was glad of the old man's words. "I was your captive," Maka said to the doubting warriors, plainly. "That is true, and I will not hide from it. But I rode back here through an open door, of my own free will, leaving my own people and my own country, to choose this man and this camp. Ask yourselves what kind of woman does that? Not a weak one, not a tool. A woman who chose you, all of you, when she had every reason to choose otherwise. You can spend that gift, or you can waste it on suspicion. But do not mistake the woman who freely returned for the captive who was once dragged in. They are not the same woman. The capture made the first. I made the second, myself, on the road back. There was no good answer to that, and Tudawi found none, and the doubt, having no fuel, went the way all such doubts go in these stories, quiet and then gone. Dahana and Maka were married, and Maka became something the borderland had never had, a healer who belonged to two peoples, and that, more than anything, is what finally tied the Apache camp to her completely, because Maka did not heal only the Apache after that. Her reputation, which had crossed the lines once to get her captured, now crossed them on purpose and in peace. When sickness came to the Lakota bands she had come from, Maka went to them with Apache escort and healed her own people and came back. When it came to the Apache, she healed them. And slowly, a healer, who moved freely and willingly between two peoples, became a thread between them, a reason for the two distant nations to think of each other not as strangers and enemies, but as peoples who shared a healer, who shared, through her, their sick children and their dying elders, and the long human business of trying to stay alive. "You captured me to save one dying chief," Maka said to Dahana, years on, "and I have ended up healing half the borderland, both sides of it. I do not think your warriors knew, when they threw me over a horse, what they were starting. They knew nothing," Dahana said. "I knew nothing. I thought I was stealing a pair of hands to save my father. I had no idea I was bringing home the woman who would heal two peoples and give me a life worth leading them through. The worst beginning I ever made turned into the best thing I ever did, and the only reason it did is that I learned, just in time, to open the door I had shut. Capture a person, and you get a tool, for a while, until they leave or die. free them, and sometimes, if you are very lucky, they choose to stay. And then you have something no capture could ever give you. Dahana and Maka grew old together in the borderland, and the old chief Maka had saved, lived years longer than anyone had thought possible, long enough to bounce his son's children on the knee of the leg the Lakota healer had refused to let him lose. When Dahana was old, and the young Apache asked how their war leader came to have a Lakota healer for a wife, he always told it honestly, beginning with the part he was least proud of. "I had her captured," Dahana would say. "I will not soften it." My father was dying, and her healing hands were famous even across the lines, and I sent warriors to take her, and they took her, and I spoke to her like a tool, like a thing I had bought. That was the worst beginning a man could make. And then the old man would smile. And then I watched her fight 3 days and 3 nights for the life of an enemy old man, asking nothing, because she could not do otherwise. And I learned that I had captured a person far greater than the skill I stole her for. So when my father was well, and the day came that I had promised to send her home, I sent her home. All the way home, free, with every door open. The hardest thing I ever did, because I could not bear to let her leave, and I let her leave anyway, since a thing chosen under capture is not chosen at all. And she rode back, of her own free will, 2 days alone. She rode back through every open door, and chose me. Remember that, young ones. The title they give this story is that I never let her leave. The truth is the opposite. The only reason she stayed is that I finally let her go. It started with a capture, a healer taken for her hands, valued like a tool, set to work under threat. And it became a marriage chosen freely on a long road back, and a healer who tied 2 peoples together. And all of it turned on a hard man who learned, just in time, that the only way to keep the person he loved was to open every door and let her choose. If you stayed with Dahana and Maka all the way to the end of this story, then you already belong here, at this fire. Another story is lit and waiting. Stay close. The frontier is wide, and these tales are far from finished.